If there is an arithmetic to absurdity, August Thorne had learnt it young and liked his sums tidy. He kept a small brass counter in his pocket the way other men keep wedding photos. It clicked with the same habitual tenderness, 1, 2, 3, a thumb press for every hand that rose. August would polish its patina before each show the way a clergyman might press a collar. There is a look to men who cultivate instruments for counting. You can see the leisured mind in the way their eyes turn away from the messy edges of things. If you press a counter hard enough, as August did, applause curves into a graph and gratitude becomes a line item on a balance sheet. If you ask him, he would tell you he counts not to commodify wonder but to keep us fed, and there is a peculiar justice to that claim. A circus that cannot buy nails for its tent will not long make space for metaphors. I do not dislike August because he counts. I dislike him sometimes because his counting refuses to contain the rest of us. Behind his brass-buttoned coat is a man who measures affection as though it were a crop to be harvested and stored. Behind my patchwork suit is a man who notices the shapes of people's smiles the way a botanist notices petals. We were, in a practical sense, opposed. We both wanted to keep the circus alive. We disagreed about how much one should be willing to exchange the soul of a thing for its stomach. That morning the town smelled of rain-soaked bread and the small, acidic promise of a market. The tent lights threw ovals on slick cobbles. Children ran between stalls with saucers for puddle surfing. Merchants bartered in a voice that had the same cadence as a bell. We had drawn a crowd that would have embarrassed sunshine. Umbrellas in every hue, coal, mustard, a tired blue made themselves into a bobbing audience. It was the kind of town that would ask nothing and give everything. Towns like that kept us afloat longer than councils or charters. I planned the act like a chemist. Not a masterpiece, those are felt, not staged, but a perfect demonstration of cause and effect. Pratfall prop-timing laughter. If laughter had a formula, I would have liked a more forgiving one. But there it was, a stack of rubber chickens, a hat that wouldn't stay on. A clumsy attempt at juggling that solved itself by becoming choreography. I practiced with the deliberation of a man testing a hypothesis. The fall was theatrical, not accidental. I let my knee catch a greased plank and heard the familiar squeal of rubber against canvas. The chickens tumbled into a ridiculous pyramid that would have made any tax inspector smile if they had a heartbeat left. The audience laughed with a clean, unambiguous sound, bright, quick, the sort of laughter that makes you think the world is in order because for a second it decides to be. August clicked his counter 3 times in the first round, twice in the second, then held it out to the light, listening to the tiny metallic heartbeat. I watched the faces. Mrs. Finch from the bakery flour smudged at the corner of her mouth laughed loud enough to see her teeth. Children became rivers of mirth. A man in the 3rd row with a damp suit laughed as if he might forget how. Their laughter was a warm thing to watch, like bread rising. And inside me, where my laugh should have been, there was a hollow like a broken drum. You can watch a storm and never feel the rain. I watched my own storm and found only wind. When the applause came, it came silver and generous. People stood because one of our acts had been so plainly committed to its own ridiculousness that standing felt like an act of solidarity. August counted as the standing ovation unfolded, the counter a metronome for the market's good cheer. He clicked the thumb press in a rhythm that matched my breathing. The tiny metallic tap became a second heartbeat that belonged to the ledger rather than me. After the show, backstage was its usual small universe: tea, damp canvas, the lemon-bitter chew of Cologne carried in by the gutters. Nell smoked something like confidence and soap at once. There is an aroma you acquire at great height, and leaned against the ropes as if those ropes were as much part of the furniture as any table. Marigold sat under a rail, palms open as though she could catch every dropped sound and put it together again with glue and silence. August had already retreated to his crate of receipts, polishing the brass counter as if it were a reliquary. You look as though you swallowed a storm, Nell said, because she has the habit of stating weather as fact. I wanted to tell her that I had swallowed everything but laughter, and now all I could taste was metal. Instead, I made a joke about the rubber chickens, and Marigold's face became a careful blank canvas. If she could speak, she would have said the things only gestures can say. You've made them laugh at their own sorrow. Now how will you let it in? August didn't do things loudly. He did things with an efficiency that made the rest of us look like imprecise instruments. He opened his palm and showed me the counter. It's a good night, he said. 126 claps for the main, 34 for the interlude, 60 in the children's piece. We're within 30 of our target. He spoke not like a man with figures, but like a priest reciting a mantra. Our target, I repeated, because the phrase had taken on an odd warmth in his mouth. Who sets the target? Does applause come with a coupon? He smiled a smile that had been practiced on creditors. The target is what keeps the wagons moving. You can have your metaphors, Merrin, but we have nails to buy. The counter proves to lenders that we are more than whim. There is a point in conversations like this where language becomes a battleground of priorities. I could have said, laughter is permission. It is a breathing out that lets people hold themselves for a moment. Instead I said, when did applause start paying for trust? It pays for planks and performers, he said. It pays for the rope that keeps you from falling. Nell made a sound like a cord snapped in silence. Sometimes the rope is a promise, she said. Sometimes counting the rope's knots won't teach you how to hold on. Counting is practical, August said, almost as if the word itself might soothe. Numbers don't cry in court. Numbers can't be mistaken for sentiment. Numbers keep us from starving. You could have supposed that there would be a tidy compromise. There was not. I think the issue wasn't numbers per se. It was the faith he placed in them. He saw the counter as an irrefutable record. I saw records as a way to keep from seeing. Do you believe that applause is the same as gratitude? I asked him because the question needed to be asked. And precisely, like a key in a lock. He clicked the counter and held it to his ear. Applause is what the market gives us. Gratitude is a private thing. We argued with the measured manner of people who had rehearsed their positions before the mirror of conscience. It felt improvised because nothing about our circumstances was rehearsed. The tents were fraying, our credit thinned like soup. The towns were drying up elsewhere. August's fear was not theatrical, it was practical. If the tent collapsed, it would not simply be the loss of a job. It would be the unmaking of a lineage. He worried about mortgage and history. I worried about the thing the mortgage might eat, the sacrament of permission. You sell tickets by the yard and then you sell ourselves to the highest bidder, I said. And what would you have us do? He asked. Refuse to count and fold. Watch as creditors resettle our banners. We cannot barter in goodwill alone. Marigold, who rarely spoke and never loudly, rose and performed a small, detailed pantomime. She took an invisible applause and stretched it like taffy. It went thin and brittle in her hands. She pulled it into the shape of a coin, and then into a bird, and then let the bird fly away. We had all watched her conjure things like that before. Demonstration without explanation. The troupe understands long before the world that performance can make a thing and unmake it in the same breath. We don't need the counter to remember that we were laughed at tonight, I said. We need some way to remember why they laughed. The problem with that sentence is that I did not have a way to answer it. There is a difference between remembering cause and remembering permission. A town might clap because you made it laugh. But did it laugh because it was allowed to be small, foolish, and forgiven for a while? Or because you had manufactured an efficient comedy that fit them like a borrowed coat? If laughter is permission, as I have often suspected, then the act of counting is an administrative move that says, this is accounted for. But permissions resisted sum totals. You cannot file a permission away and expect to find it later when sorrow knocks. That night, The chorus of the argument petered out into the usual domesticities of a troop. Someone boiled the kettle, someone patched a sock. Nell taught 2 apprentices to not a saving throw, half in scolding and half in lullaby. August balanced the day's receipts and tucked the counter back into its pouch like a talisman. But the hollow grew louder. I tried another performance the next afternoon, not for the market, but for the measure itself. If applause were a ledger entry, then I would see what the ledger bought. I arranged an act that was almost an insult to seriousness, a fake magic trick, in which I produced a bouquet of soggy weeds and pretended they were roses. I let the trick fail in all the ways a trick might fail: hat crooked, flourish overdone, timing askew. The joke was on me and on the brittle assumption that spectacle must tell the whole truth. The laugh came again. People laughed at the failing of pretense. I felt their laughter like waves against a quay. August recorded each swell and put them into columns. The numbers comforted him. They did not reach me. Later, Nell took me to the wagon roofs. We climbed up past the banners and the scattered puddles and watched the town go through its evening rituals. There was a hush between us that gravity had nothing to do with. It was the hush of 2 people who had been on the same high wire and then let the line sag. "There's a difference between making a trick and making someone safe," she said, her breath setting small ghosts against the cold. "You can make them laugh, Marin. You teach them to trust a particular kind of sound. But trust is not the same as trade. When I make them laugh, I catalogue their smiles as though I might collect and return them later," I admitted. "I thought if I made enough smiles, one of them might fit in my chest." She said nothing for a long time, which in Nell means she is considering whether an act is possible. "Maybe the thing you need," she said at last, "is not in their applause, but in your willingness to be ridiculous without extracting anything." That sounded like a proverb. Nell is full of proverbs pulled from the line of a rope. But it unnerved me because she had said a truth that made finance irrelevant. I thought of August down below, smoothing receipts the way other men smooth hemlines. It is terrible when people you love make the wrong calculation. When we returned to the hollow that is our backstage, Marigold surprised me. She took my hand, a gesture that in our troupe is rarer than a standing ovation, and through a precise pantomime, she gave me back the shape of my own laugh. She mimed the timing, the way my shoulders twitch, the way my eyes narrow snarkily. She did not imitate the sound. She offered an architecture, the scaffold of how a laugh builds in me. In her little gesture there was a kindness that felt like a ledger entry I could not pay back. "You cannot count what people will forgive you to be," Marigold seemed to say with her fingers. "You can only present yourself and see if they choose the transaction." I woke that night with the brass counter's soft click in my dreams. It had become a clock I could not wind. It occurred to me in a thought so simple it made me mildly angry with myself for not having had it earlier, that counting applause might keep our tent upright. But it could not tell us whether the applause was granting permission to be small and silly. The counter records the effect, the thing visible. It does not record the gift. The solution did not arrive fully formed. It negotiated itself in little insights, the sort that only appear when you have stopped arguing and started listening. I had been trying, I realized, to buy back my laugh by ensuring the circus solvency. I had thought that if the circus survived, my laugh would find its place on the roster. But that assumes laughter is a resource that returns only when stability is achieved, an assumption as neat as a folded tent. What if laughter returns when it is given freely and returned in kind, a circular economy of permission, not profit? I spoke of this after midnight to no one in particular and to everyone who would listen. August slept near his receipts and murmured some numbers in his sleep. Nell dreamed of a rope's end and woke with a grin. Marigold rested like a closed book, her face lit by lamplight. "We can keep counting if it feeds us," I said, "but we will also practice giving the thing away without expecting reimbursement." Teach an apprentice a joke and ask nothing in return. Let the town laugh without making it a line item. That is how permission spreads. It is not a scam. It is risk. August blinked at me as if I had announced a new tax. Risk sells poorly, he said. Only because we have been pricing ourselves wrong, I replied, and that answer felt like fumbling for a rope. There's something we owe to the people who clap. Not a receipt, but a reason they were allowed to laugh. It might be the only thing the townspeople remember next year. If we make it a ledger, it's gone. If we make it a ritual, it's ours. He counted a tiny, private tally in his head then, which is what men of his temperament do. He is a man who measures hope by the same yardstick he uses for nails. I saw him, for one thin moment, imagine a trade where joy is returned as a custom, a ceremony, a promise, a small ongoing repair, rather than a one-off sale. It was not conversion, it was calculation altered by affection. Well, keep the counter, he said slowly, but we'll start a practice. After the show, a small moment for the town, no charge. A ceremony to stitch the laughter back into the place it was borrowed from. You will lead it, Merrin. Do this foolishly and brilliantly. The concession was small and enormous. It felt like a rope thrown between two towers, one anchored by ledgers and the other by a hope that couldn't be counted. That night I sat with my pocket watch, which tells past jokes instead of time. It ticked its wrongness with a fondness that annoyed me. The watch reminded me of the particular shape of a laugh I had not yet recovered, not a single great bell, but the small, poorest chuckle that shows a person is permitted to be ridiculous and forgiven. If counting kept the tent whole, then the ceremony would be the mortar. The hook that drew me forward was not a plan of conquest or a trick devised to fool the auditor. It was smaller and stranger, to try deliberately to give away my own laugh. Not to hoard it for restoration, but to offer it as a gift in a new form, an act of theatrical generosity that asked nothing in return. Perhaps the townspeople, when offered a small ritual and a permission, would return the favor. Perhaps they would not. The risk felt like the tightrope, a long, thin thing that requires both courage and an acceptance of our shared likelihood to falter. When the next morning's mist began to thin and people emerged with their umbrellas like tired sentinels, I tucked the brass counter into a drawer and set my pocket watch on the sill. August had his receipts in a neat stack. Nell's boots were damp and triumphant. Marigold had folded her silence into a neat handkerchief. We had, between us, a foot on either side of a gap. The question was whether we would step together. I was going to try to teach a town to laugh back its own permission. If the attempt failed, we would still have the counter and the receipts and perhaps planks for a season more. If it succeeded, perhaps I would find a laugh that belonged to me, not because it was counted, but because it was shared. Either way, I told myself, it would be an act worth measuring, only not with brass. I have a pocket watch that tells past jokes. It is not particularly useful when you want to know the hour indeed. It is terrible at appointments, but it is excellent at the kind of timing one needs for pratfalls and long silences. If you wind it, which I do because there is comfort in the small mechanical insistence of parts that have not yet dissolved into puddles, the watch will click and deliver an anecdote you have told before. It will offer you a punchline you once used on an evening when the rain was steady and people's faces were soft. There are times when I consult that watch and feel like a man living inside a scrapbook. Other times it is akin to consulting an ex who remembers you better than you merit. On the morning Etta showed me the chest, I had the watch in my palm and no joke to match it. The tent smelled of damp canvas soon, with a thread of laundry soap and the faint, industrial perfume of brass August's breath. We were at that precarious hour that belongs neither to night nor morning, the time when possibilities are still plausible and the world has not decided to harden yet. Etta had been handling our logistics for as long as I can remember. Meaningful time in the circus is not measured in years so much as in seasons of whether you can hang a sign on. Her spectacles fogged and cleared on the scope of her nose, as if they could detect the humidity of secrets. She wore her coat of mismatched fabrics the way one wears a history, patched, reluctant to let go, a little proud of the scars. When she sat across from me at our rickety kitchen table, the lamp between us made hollows on the edges of her hair, like a private cathedral of thrift. "I have been keeping accounts," she said. "That is the sentence you might expect from a clerk. It is not the sentence one expects from someone who tells futures for a living. But Etus magic, if you call it that, has always been less about prophecy than about preparation. She reads rain patterns like a librarian reads due dates. She keeps lists. She keeps crumbs of consolation in the lining of pockets like a squirrel's hidden winter. On the table between us she set a satchel the size of a small apology and then, with a ritualistic slowness I was beginning to associate with her, opened it. Inside, nestling in fabric soft with years, was a chest-carved wood, a little darker than the rest of the caravan furniture, with a clasp shaped like a crescent moon. There was a faint lavender smell when Eta lifted the lid. I cannot remember the last time I smelled lavender intentionally in a circus. Unless you count the time a lady of means once sneezed into a handkerchief during a performance and then fainted, and we had to stop the show to fan her with a banner. When the lid opened, the coins inside made a sound like small convocations, clink, 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 real money. Not the patched coins August keeps for show, nor the ticket stubs with good intentions, but coins that had been saved and tucked away. There were also folded scraps of paper, edges browned by handling, the kind of fold that holds a human shame like a seed. I do not know what I expected. I suppose I expected a speech prepared and embroidered. I expected a ledger heavy with reasons why she could not. I did not expect the smallness of it. What was saved was enough to buy us a week or two in a damp town with a generous landlord. Perhaps enough to pay for canvas patches that would not dissolve on contact with municipal indifference. It was not a fortune. It was a private economy of hope. "Where did you get this?" August said, from the doorway where he had been pretending to mend a banner but was actually listening with the intensity of someone who counts breaths as currency. Etta did not look up. She smoothed the ledger paper between her fingers. "From people," she said, "from odd jobs, from lending small comforts and being paid back in gratitude, from a purse I kept for emergencies and for apologies I have never written, from another life when I thought lists might keep heartbreak from becoming law." A silence settled across the kitchen like a damp towel. In the quiet, Nell kept one boot on the threshold, the other tucked inside, as if she were balancing on an invisible wire. Marigold's face was expressionless, but the black heart at temple twitched at the corner like a moth at a window. We joked because clowns always joke as if gravity were negotiable, and then August counted the coins with hands that shivered in ways his brass counter could not note. He pushed the counter across the table with a practiced thumb, clicking, and the sound felt in the ticklish part of my ribs. The coins slid into his palm, and for a moment he held the future the way one holds a fragile bird. Etta folded open the ledger and slid the papers across so I could see. Not all of the pages were names. Some were short sentences, shorthand emotional receipts that read like a librarian's notes on returned feelings. "Mrs. Greeley said she could breathe after the song paid in biscuits. 3 Crows Lane permit denied left a hole." I scanned the handwriting, small, economical, sometimes shaking. The list had been kept for years. Each name had a date beside it, and beside some of the dates there was a shorthand I soon recognized, an initial that matched a face. A circlet that meant something had been tried and failed. "Why are you giving this to us?" I asked. "Why now?" Etta's spectacles were fogged again. It was a minor human gesture breathing through the lenses, and it made her look like a person who had been doing something very human and simple for so long that she had forgotten to announce it as an act of defiance. "Because I am tired of carrying names," she said. "Because lists are not a substitute for a hand." because she paused, and then the very small thing happened. Her voice broke. I have been around this troupe long enough to know the precise tone when someone has been polishing their own sorrow into a serviceable shape and finally decides to stop. Because you need time, and I do not want to be the sort of person who keeps saving them up and then dies with a purse full of what could have been given. It is a remarkable thing when someone makes a moral economy out of shame and then decides to bankrupt themselves to try another model. We have in the circus many economies: the economy of applause, the economy of favors, the economy of stories traded for soup. Etos was an economy of quiet reparations, small coins, small absolutions. It will not be enough, August said, which was not an argument but an arithmetic fact. August is very good at arithmetic. He measures applause with a brass counter the way some measure pulse. He likes to know that a laugh is a numerable quantity. Numbers comfort him. Tonight they were brittle, like the edges of old coins. It will be enough for now, Etta said. And enough for now is what we need. I remember the way the light in the kitchen shifted when she spoke. A drizzle on the canvas grew into a small rain, like someone practicing tears. Rain is unserious until people take it seriously. When a townspeople step into umbrellas, they do not always realize they are choosing a future. The drizzle made little hieroglyphs on the tent's inner skin. The sound was like 100 tiny hands applauding the modesty of the moment. We distributed the money with the solemnity of people sliding a bandage over a bad cut. August paid a canvasser to come and secure our seams. Nell bought rope treated for damp rot. I paid for tickets to a town that had a permissive mayor and a bakery who promised to provide us a place to rehearse indoors. The chest itself was placed under the table like an altar to small governance. We did not speak of the ledger's names as objects of trade, but as things we would try to reach again, people Etta had not reached before, that perhaps needed the circus in ways that had nothing to do with spectacle and everything to do with being witnessed. You shouldn't have carried it alone, I said finally, the kind of observation that arrives belatedly, dressed in a clown's late clothes. I had been meaning to make a joke, but it turned into something else because the heart does not always cooperate with timing. She shrugged, a modest tilt. Carrying names seemed efficient. It allowed me to catalogue sorrow before it became a law. But lists are strict. They harden into edicts. They become them. I would rather be clumsy and messy and hand things out and ask for help. August made a face. You're asking us to become messy ledgers? No, Etta said. To become hands. The disagreement was not resolved by argument so much as by that peculiar circus practice of improvisation. The troupe, when faced with a failing prop or a torn seam, shifts into the act. Nell, who is adept at doing impossible things and making them look smaller, stood and walked to the chest. She ran a palm over the wood, as if to check whether it would take a climb. We'll stretch it, she said simply. We'll make it last. We'll string it thin and make every coin sing. Marigold produced from the back pocket of her costume a folded tissue the size of a small flag and performed a brief pantomime of sewing coins into pockets, handing them to children, and then the mime pulled a mouth knot there into a smile that felt like a promise. Her silence is louder than most people's arguments. Sometimes that silence says exactly what is necessary. I remember sitting there and feeling something shift in me, something heavier and slipperier than an idea. I have been traveling to get my laugh back, as if it were a lost item one might claim at a train station. But Etta's coin and ledger offered me a different diagram. Maybe a laugh was not a thing to be held by one pair of hands, but to be kept in common purse. Maybe what I was missing was not the sound alone, but the permission to spend it freely, to give it away without expecting its precise return. What am I meant to pay, I asked, not about money but about honesty, which is also a form of currency, if I am given this. Etta looked at me with the patience of someone who has sorted many small misgivings into categories and found them all to be less urgent than the ones that make a person refuse a hand. pay it forward, she said, not in the grand sense. In the small and embarrassing and frequent sense, hand a laugh when you can. Take one when you need it. Do the small, awkward favors that ruin your dignity and rebuild your guts. I imagine some philosophers would have a problem with this economics. Giveaway culture is not a balanced ledger, but the circus has never been an economic model meant to survive precise scrutiny. We are a bandage economy, quick stitches, sudden adhesives, performances that ask people to believe in a minute and then carry it home. Etta's chest solved one problem by transferring the weight elsewhere. It did not bring the tent whole. It did not stop the rain from being audited by no zero. But it created a temporary cathedral of trust in our caravan kitchen, and in that small structural change there was enough light to plan the next step. That afternoon we rehearsed in a barn whose owner smelled of milk, and perhaps second marriages. The receipts from Etta's cupboard paid for hay and for the use of the barn warm and dry. August rehearsed the opening with an enthusiasm that was not pure arithmetic. He clapped his hands like the head of some small, eccentric bank and tried to teach us rhythm as though savings could be turned into music. I performed a little. The watch in my pocket told me an old joke, and I used it like a blueprint, and it landed with polite applause. I could feel, under that applause, the texture of the day, small relief, like a patch sewn over a leak. After the show, a woman came up and touched Etta's sleeve. "You were the person who wrote me a note," she said, "years ago. You told me not to sign the contract and I didn't. I have been looking for you. I have bread and an empty room if you ever come south." Etta blinked as if someone had put a new page into the ledger. She said, "I thought I had done enough." "You did a small thing," the woman said. "The small things are why people keep going. It is an easy sentiment to make an ornament of." But in the low light of that barn, smelling of straw and the slight metallic sweetness of coin, it landed like a wet hand on a collar. It was not all. It was not final. It was, however, a sound that resembled the kind of thing we needed, others noticing we had been noticed. That night, after the barn emptied, I sat outside with my pocket watch and thought about economies. I thought about the ledger and the list of names and about Etta's decision. A small bankruptcy carried out not in the loss of coin, but in the loss of solitude. What does it mean to give your savings to others? It is to declare that you would rather be useful than safe. It is to say that the story you keep of yourself careful, prudent, a person who mitigates sorrow by categorizing it can be rewritten. I do not pretend that Etta's coin fixed the circus. It bought us a week, maybe two, and it bought us a rehearsal space where we could try on new acts that required more courage than profit margins. It bought me, more importantly, the right to feel that laughter might be a communal coin. The thought is intoxicating in its cheapness, the idea that you can deposit joy in a shared bank and withdraw it when necessary. But like all bank metaphors, it fails when you try to cash out the profound. As I closed the chest for the night and tucked the ledger back into Etta's satchel, I felt oddly like a thief who had just been pardoned. When Etta slid her spectacles down to the end of her nose and smiled a small, private barometer of relief, I felt the first, tiny, almost imperceptible loosening in my ribs. Something that could be called hope. It was not the resonant laugh I had come looking for, not by a long margin. It was, instead, the acceptance that we might find it together. The tent did not reweave itself overnight. It is, I learned, never that simple. The world does not change its mind because one person decides to be generous. But the rain that night was softer and the town's children asked fewer awkward questions. Marigold slept with a smile like a person who has learned a new gesture. August made a list that was not only of receipts, but of people he might be willing to trust. Nell practiced a new fall that involved catching someone else's hand instead of her own foot. Gus was tinkering, though not to invent a machine to count joy. Rather, to invent a device that stitched when the wind tried to tear. Small changes, they are all we had. At dawn, with the sky still undecided, I wound my watch and listened to its joke without trying to perform it. It was enough that it replied. I packed my pockets with coins from Etta's chest to take to the town mayor if needed, and I tucked a scrap of the ledger into my coat like a promise I hadn't fully earned. When I left the caravan, I felt like I was carrying not only currency but a new set of instructions. Laugh when given the chance. Offer a hand when it is asked, and do not hoard apologies. It is a modest architecture of living, but it is one that lets in the rain. We have, as of tonight, one more thing: time. Whether it will be enough is a question for tomorrow's math and no. Zoo's ledger. For now, in the small warmth of a caravan that smells faintly of lavender and bread, we have given each other a reason to risk the next joke. When I walked away from the tent that day, I thought of the pocket watch pressing cold against my ribs, and of Etta's hand closing the satchel as if it was sealing a wound with a kiss. I wanted to laugh. Not because I had reclaimed the sound. There is a difference between having recovered an object and having learned to live with it, but because there was something about this business of giving that tickled me in the middle, where I kept the habit of shame. It was a laugh that belonged to others as much as it did to me, which I suppose is the whole point. We will see how long this keeps. The coins will stretch or they will not. The towns will be generous or they will not. No. Zor will write in its ledger and perhaps snip out a smile from a margin. But in the meantime, I have been given a small and fragile thing: the permission to believe that a laugh can be built out of shared risk. I will try, awkwardly, to be generous with the sound. I will try to spend it without expecting a receipt. When the rain picked up that evening, it sounded different on the canvas, less like accusation and more like applause. We counted it, as August will in a different mood, but this time we counted it with our hands instead of a brass counter tucking coins away, tying rope, rehearsing a handoff. The ledger remains, folded in Etta's satchel. The chest sits under the table. The watch in my pocket will, when wound, tell another joke, perhaps one I have not yet earned. The tent has not mended. Nothing in the world mends all at once. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of mending meander into the place where I store my jokes. And as I should not finish without a final theatrical note, there is a hook in every honest chapter. We have bought time with small coins and a larger courage. Out of the corners of the caravan, a new problem begins to twitch, one of Gus' contraptions sputtering awake, a device that can, reputedly, let someone feel a laugh without earning it. It is an idea both promising and profoundly distasteful. We will need to decide whether to use it and whether we can stomach the answer: God or no. Zero, or the kindly mayor of the next town, willing. The next act will involve a machine that might give me a laugh temporarily, and with that possibly the wrong sort of salvation. I do not like the horizon that develops when someone offers a shortcut to what must be learned. But the chest is under the table, and Etta is in the caravan folding another page into the ledger as if to rub out the sharp edges of the past. There will be arguments and a mock trial and, possibly, a contraption with gears that will beep in sympathy. For now, though, the coins sit quiet as confessions and the tent breathes. We have bought time, which is the most dangerous and hopeful thing one can purchase when all else unravels. I walked back toward the caravan with the watch ticking jokes I did not feel obliged to tell yet, and that, in a world that measures everything by the weight of things, felt like the first tiny act of rebellion.